Hello students. So today we will study the next topic in the object-oriented programming of Python. So basically, what is the difference between procedural programming and object-oriented programming? So in the procedural programming, a program is typically a list of instructions, and where on the other hand, in the object-oriented program, object-oriented programs are built around objects. So which are the advantages of this approach? So basically, object-oriented programming supports use of classes. Using object-oriented programming, you can reuse the reusable patterns of code. OOP allows you to reuse code which has many benefits, like the code can be more readable and maintainable. You can create your own user defined data types. Also, a large complex program, you can divide it into modules, which is nothing but a subdividing a bigger problem into smaller problems. This also helps to hide the complexity. So these are the advantages of object oriented programming. Let's talk the how the code looks different in procedural programming like here, and in object oriented programming the code looks something like here. So the code will consist of classes and objects. uh, Object oriented programming, it support different programming approaches like we have studied. uh, all programs in object oriented programming consist of classes and object. So basically a class allows you to create a new data type, and object has two characteristics, attributes and behavior. Remember, the important thing about objects is that objects are mutable. So see, objects can store data using ordinary variables that belong to the object. Variables that belong to an object are referred to as fields. Objects can have the functionality by using functions that belong to a class. Such functions are called methods of the class. So remember, using class, you can create new user defined data type. It can have The class can have its own variables and its own functions. The variables that belong to a class, they are known as fields, and functions which belong to a class, they are known as methods. So collectively, fields and method referred to as attributes of the class. So the fields which belong to a class, they are of two types. Fields are nothing but the variables of a class. The variables don't belong to an instance or object of the class. They are known as instance variables, and variables that belong to the class itself, they are known as class variables. There are specific differences between class variables and instance variables. So first try to understand what are the uh, characteristics of class variable. So the class variables are declared at the class level, and hence they are referred to as class variables. When we expect variables are going to be consistent across all instances or objects of a class, then you can write class variables. You can write them when you would like to initialize a variable, and you can define that variable at the class level. These variables are defined within the class construction. They are owned by the class itself. Class variables are shared by all instances of the class. They therefore will generally have the same value for every instance unless you are using the class variable to initialize a variable. Remember, class variables are not part of any methods of the class. They are defined outside of all the methods, and they can class variables can be of any data type. So instance variables, now we will look. So these variables are declared at the instance level. They are called instance variables. You have to write these variables inside the class methods, and when we anticipate variables will change significantly across instances, means across all objects, you have to define them at the instance level. Instance variables are owned by instances of the class. This means that for each object or instance of a class, the instance variables are different. These variables are defined within methods. Instance variable owned by objects of the class allow for each object or instance to have different values assigned to those variables. So how to create a class? This is a syntax. You have to use class keyword, then you have to write any valid identifier name, provide colon. In this block, you can write the class, fields, methods, and then you, you have to create object of the class to access those fields and methods. In object oriented programming, now the methods, a class can have any number of methods. All of you know, as we have studied, methods are nothing but the functions which belong to a class. The class methods are different from normal method in one way, like the self. So this self keyword, remember, for every class keyword, the class methods, the self will be the first parameter, even if you define it or not. So this self will be like the all class methods all have a special first parameter that we name by convention self. The first parameter gives access to the object instance, so we can set attributes and call methods using dot notation. So remember, let's say even if you have a class name my class which has a method which has an object my object, if you try to access this object and any method, and if you just provide two arguments, then by default this first argument will be self. And this also means that if you have a method which takes no arguments, then still you have the one argument, the self. The classes objects can have methods just like function, except that it will have extra self variable. So how it will look like in the previous class example, this is a class definition and this is a method of the class. By default, it will have self parameter and it is nothing but the instance or object of the class. So now see the init method. So this method is automatically called when class constructor is invoked. The constructor method is used to initialize the data. It is run as soon as an object of a class is instantiated. So how to write the init method? The syntax is same, like you have to add it like any other normal method definition. Write the keyword in it and you have to provide two underscores before and after the method. uh, so this is the init method. Remember, this will act as a constructor method, so you don't need to provide any uh, uh, don't need to call it. It will be invoked as soon as the object is created. So like in this example, see, this is a class definition which has two methods, init and say hi. A self parameter will be the first parameter for all methods of a class, and init method will be called automatically when the object is declared. So let's say in this example, object P of class person is declared with the default value Swaroop, and this say I method will display this information. So now study the next important topic, which is inheritance. Inheritance is the process by which one class takes on attributes and methods of another. So newly formed classes are called child classes, and the classes that child classes are derived from are called parent classes. Child classes can override or extend the attributes and method of parent class. This means that child classes has access to all the methods fields of parent class. Child class inherits all of the parents' attributes, but they can also specify attributes and methods that are unique to themselves. So this is a simple example of inheritance. So two classes are declared here, students and engineering student. The student class has three methods: init method, get data method, and print data method. And engineering students class has three methods: init method, input method, and display method. This is the object ABC of engineering students class. This object has access to get data method of parent class, and it has access to print data method of parent class also, and the this object has access to methods that are belonging to this class also. So this is the example of inheritance. And the another important feature of object oriented programming is polymorphism. What is polymorphism? Polymorphism is the condition of occurrence in different forms. So basically polymorphism is the ability to leverage the same instance for different underlying forms such as data types or classes. This permits functions to use entities of different types at different types. For object-oriented programming in Python, this means that a particular object belonging to a particular class can be used in the same way as if it were a different object belonging to a different class. It allows for flexibility flexibility and loose coupling. It is important feature of class definition in Python that is utilized when you have commonly named methods across classes or subclasses. This allows functions to use objects of any of these polymorphic classes without needing to be. Now we will study practical applications. I have written sample codes. I will show you the execution and will quickly recap the theory which we have studied till date regarding the object oriented concept. So the class data type creates a new data type, all of you know, and how to create a simple class. So see this definition here. Language class is created. This class contains two methods. So one is init method and another one is say hi method. Init method will act as a constructor. This method need not to be called explicitly. It will get executed whenever the new object of a class is created. So this is class definition. This line will create object P for the language class and it will assign default value for the parameter. So init method has first parameter self which will pass object reference, current object reference, and another one will be say name. Name parameter will assign the value which is passed while creating a object and it will assign that value for this object, and this method say I method will print this statement. So if I execute this, you can see the output. So yes, so this is the output. Hello, my name is Python language. So this is how you have to create class, create init method and create objects and call the other method. I hope all of you understood everything. Those who have not understood, please go and study, or please go and listen the theory first, then you will easily understand this. So now go to next example. How to create a simple class. A class can contains methods and uh, methods and fields. So this is an example of my class. This class has only two fields, x and str1. So this class will not contain any method, and here, as these fields are inside a class, they will be known as class variables. So if I execute this clause, the class definition is created. This code will create objects of the class. So for this class, object p1 and object p2. Now all of you know value of class variables will remain same through all the instances. So if you execute this code, you will see object p1 and p2 will have same value for variable for field x and field str1. So this is the use of class variables, how you can access them. So now take example of this class. So the init method will act as a constructor. You do not need to call it explicitly, and the self parameter is a reference to the current instance of the class, and object is the instance of the class, and it is used to access variables that belongs to the class. So the first name, okay, for all class methods the first parameter will always be self. Most of the time it is good to write its name as safe, but you can ignore the self name and you can write another name also. So this is class definition. This class contains only init method. Here this code will create two objects for the person class. Each object has different values for name and age, and if you access the instance variables using object name, then if you execute this code, you will see how to access this using the different objects. So as I told you, the first parameter of any class method will always be the self parameter, but the name self it's not compulsory, though it is a good practice to write it as self, but the first name can be anything. This first parameter will always act as a reference to the instance of the class. So like this is another class example which has two methods only, init method and my function method. Fields declared inside the methods, they are known as instance variables, and you can access instance variable using the object of the class. So this person has two methods, init and my function. This method will create object of person class with default values John and 36, and the object name is P1. Whenever you create object, this init method will get automatically called, and it will assign values which are passed as a parameter to the constructor. So by default, for this object, value John will be assigned to name and value 36 will be assigned to the age. That this code is declared inside the init method, and this another function, my function, will going to print the value of name and object for value of name and age for this object P1. So if you execute the code, you will receive this. Now, if I change the value, let's say instead of Joy, if I pass value J and age 36, now when I will execute the code again, by default, without calling init method, this value J and 30 will be assigned to this object. Let's change the name of the object P2, and if you execute this my function by using the object name, you will see the value J and 30 assigned automatically. So I will execute it, and you can see the values are assigned automatically without calling the init method. So init method need not to be called explicitly. It's called by default when the object is created, and it assigns the values which are passed as a parameter. Now let's see example of str function. So let's take this example. Here a simple class named person is created. It has only init method which will act as a constructor. This line will create object of class person. What if you pass object name to the print statement? Then let's say if I execute this code, you will see output like this. So by default, if you don't use this string function as part of a class definition, it represents the string present representation of the object. So person objects, this is the string representation. But what if you want to print the values of few attributes or variables of a class? Then like init method, you can add this string method inside the class definition. All of you know the first parameter of any class method will always be a self parameter. So this init method will assign values and when the object of class is created, and this string method, if you add the statement return, so this will return the value assigned to name and age parameters of the class. So let's take this. In this example, person class has two methods. This line will create object of person class. Now, as this class has string method added, if you print this, if you pass the name of the object P1, then if you execute the code, what you will see is that this P1 will print the values which are assigned at the time of object creation. Similarly, if you change the values to like some other values, like initially value Shaunak and 20 was assigned to the object P1. Now using object and this method, this field, if you assign value 19 to the age, and if you change the value of name to the you, if you print, you will see the values. So you can use this string method if you want to show which are values assigned to the class methods or fields. So that is the use of string method. Now another example is that object can also contain methods. Methods in objects are functions that. So till now the class person has only init method. Init, if you want to add a new method inside the person class, how to do this? So the adding method inside a class is same like adding a new function inside the program definition. Remember here that the new method which you will add in the respective class definition will belong to that class only. So in this class person, if you have given a problem statement to add a function that prints a greeting and execute it on the P1 object, so you have to add new function like this. Remember, while referring to a function inside the class, they will be referred as methods, not functions. So this method, this is the method declaration. It will print this greeting, hello, my name is, and the name. So the first parameter will be always a self parameter, and this line will create object of this class person, which will pass the values John and 36 to the parameters name and age respectively. At the time this object will created, this init method will call default, and it will assign the values which are passed here, name and age. And using this object, you can call the new method my function, which will print this output. So if you execute the code, you can see this output. So you can add as many methods as part of any class. Remember, all the methods inside a class you have to access using the objects of the class, and they will be referred as methods. Now see the next topic, the practice or a problem of next topic, which is inheritance. All of you know, using inheritance, a class can acquire the attributes and methods of another class. So this helps in using this helps in using reusability. So to 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 have a implement inheritance, you need to have two classes. Let's take example. Here a class person which we already defined. The class person has two methods, init method and print name method. This program will create object of class person. Now another class student wants to access all the methods of the class person. So to inherit the person class, this syntax you must remember, that you have to write new class name with the class keyword class name, and in the brackets you have to pass the name of the parent class, which will be person in this case. At the time of class declaration, if you don't know the about the behaviors and fields of the class, then just write the keyword pass. This will create the class only. So and now see in this line, this line will create object of class student. Student has inherited person as a parent class. So the init method of parent class will be called when this object is created, and it will pass the value Mike and Olsen to the first name and last name, and print name method will print the values. So if after executing this statement, you will see the value Mike Olsen. Now remember, X object is object of class student. It has access to the print name method because it has inherited person class. So uh, now see this example. In this example, you can, if you want to inherit the init function of the parent class, then in the class student, what you can do is that you can have init method of the student class, and if you want the functionality of init method should be same like the parent class, then this line will invoke the init method from the parent class, which is person in this case, when the object will created. After this, if you have to add another functionality for student specific object, then that you can add on here. If you use a super function, it will make the child class inherit all the methods and properties of its parent class. So the syntax of that is use the super method, and it will inherit all the methods and properties from its parent. So now let's see this example. Here you have two classes, person and student. Person will be the parent class and student will be the child class. So the student class has inherited person as a parent. Person has methods init and print name, And student has also init method. In this method, using super keyword, you can inherit all the functionality. And then if you want to add new behavior for specific for the student class object, like let's say uh, init person has only two fields, first name and last name, but this student class has additional field which is year. And if you want to assign value of the year in the init function of the student class, then you have to just add this line here. This line will create object of class student. When this object will created, it will invoke first the student class init method. Because this method has super function, it will then invoke the init method of the parent class. It will assign the values Mike and Olsen to the first name and last name. After that, this line will assign the value 2009 to the graduation year. And this method, the object of student class, will access the method print name of the parent class, and this line will print the graduation year. So if you execute the code, you will see this as the output. So basically, uh, these all are the examples of how to use inheritance in object oriented programming. So now let's take this example. This is just a simplified version, a modified version of the previous code. In this code also there are two classes, person and student. Person will be the parent class for the student class, and here person has two methods in it and print. Student has one method in it. Using super function, it will add the functionality of the init method of the parent. And now see, you can declare value of graduation year inside this method also. So graduation year value, you can write it this way. So this using these different ways, you can assign values to the fields. So this object, x student object, will get invoked because this object has person as a parent class. By default, when the init method of this object will get invoked, then Mike and Olsen value will get assigned to the first name and last name because of this, and value of graduation year will be assigned in this line. After the execution of this code, you can see the values. So now see the next example of how to use uh, class variables and instance variables. So see, here this is another class, employee. Now you will understand the difference between instance variables and class variables. So this variable is variable belonging to the class employee. It is not declare inside any of the methods. So this will be referred to as a class variable. And initially the value is assigned to 0. This employee class has three methods: init method, display count method, and display employee method. Init method by default will assign the values name and salary, which are passed to the objects at the time of object creation. And it will whenever new employee object will get created, it will increment the count. Display count method will print the total number of employees using this variable, and display employee method will print the self name and will print the name and salary of the employee. So see, here first employee object is created, here another employee object is created, and these two objects, employee 1 and employee 2, will call display employee method. So remember, the class variable value will remain same throughout for both the objects, but the value of name and salary will be different, which is like here. So if you execute the code, you will see the output. The for employee 1 object, the output is name is Omkar, salary is 4000, which the value we passed at the type of object creation. For a second employee object, name will be Shubham, salary will be 5000, but this employee count variable, which is declared as a class variable,